What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton was right all along? That the SF-25 not only betrayed him, but hid a defect so deep that not even the wind tunnels could detect it? Why didn't anyone see it before? And more importantly, what does this mean for Ferrari in 2026? When the Formula One season comes to an end, the post-season tests usually go unnoticed by the general public. They seem like just another formality on the calendar. Days dedicated to tire testing, young drivers looking for their place in some technical validation laps. But what happened in Abu Dhabi at the end of 2025 was not simply another test. It was the beginning of a story that could completely alter the perception of Ferrari's performance and of Lewis Hamilton himself. In this routine context, Ferrari decided to instrument one of its SF-25s with ultra-high-precision experimental sensors, originally designed to collect data for the 2026 car project. These sensors were not intended to directly evaluate the current car, but rather to capture advanced physical phenomena that are not normally detected with the standard telemetry used on the track. To everyone's surprise, those sensors picked up something that would change the entire narrative of the season. The pilot in charge of that round of tests was not a young man in training, nor a reserve pilot without pressure. It was none other than Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, recently arrived at Ferrari and still in the full integration stage. From the outside, it might seem like a simple evaluation session, an opportunity for Hamilton to continue adapting to Maranello's technical environment. But from within, those twists hid an unexpected complexity. What happened in those laps was, technically, invisible to traditional systems. No conventional tool, wind tunnel, vehicle dynamic simulator, or predictive software had captured the anomaly. Only when the SF-25 was subjected to extreme lateral loads, typical of corners like Turn 9 at Yas Marina, did the sensors reveal unusual chassis flex. A minimal deformation, yes, but enough to drastically alter the aerodynamic behavior of the car. Under these conditions, the bottom of the car suffered a sudden interruption of airflow, which disrupted the delicate balance of ground effect and caused an unexpected loss of downforce on the rear axle. What this generated, in practice, was an unpredictable car, which behaved in one way at the entrance of the curve and in a completely different way at the apex. This irregularity, later described by engineers as localized structural collapse, manifested itself only when G-forces exceeded certain thresholds for a sustained time. That is why it did not appear in short simulations or traditional analyses. It was an intermittent, erratic failure that only arose under very specific conditions, but it was devastating for the pilot who experienced it. And that driver had been Hamilton all season. This is how what many within the paddock now call the phantom defect was discovered. A real, deeply technical physical failure that went completely unnoticed for months, and that, had it not been for that exact combination of advanced sensors and Hamilton's sensitivity behind the wheel, would probably never have come to light. And in that moment, the history of the SF-25, Hamilton and Ferrari changed forever. For much of the 2025 season, comments about Lewis Hamilton's performance within Ferrari were the subject of criticism, speculation, and in some quarters, even ridicule. The narrative that prevailed in the media and social networks was clear. Hamilton had lost his reflexes, he was no longer the same as before, and his arrival in Maranello was not having the expected impact. Faced with the solid performances of his teammate Charles Leclerc, the Briton seemed simply disconnected from the car, erratic in qualifying and vulnerable in the race. But what no one knew at the time, not even his own team, was that Hamilton was fighting an invisible enemy. A car that was breaking in his hands without leaving a trace in conventional telemetry. From the first Grand Prix, Hamilton expressed feelings that were difficult to explain. He spoke of a lack of connection between the front and rear of the car, of unpredictable reactions mid-corner, of a break in balance that appeared without a logical pattern. In the eyes of the engineers, the data showed nothing out of the ordinary. In simulations, the SF-25 was stable, consistent, and even showed advantages in certain technical sectors. For this reason, Hamilton's complaints were filed on more than one occasion as subjective, as part of a process of mental and technical adaptation. But he insisted, again and again. And it was that stubbornness, that persistence in pointing out what was not seen, that finally allowed us to discover what is today recognized as one of the most subtle and damaging technical defects that a Ferrari car has had in its recent history. The so-called phantom defect directly affected the structure of the SF-25 chassis. Under sustained G loads and at certain lateral torsion angles, the front axle flexed enough to compromise the aerodynamic seal of the flat bottom. This, translated into driver's language, meant that the car suddenly lost load on the rear axle just at the most critical moment of a corner. For someone like Hamilton, used to finding the millimeter limit of grip, this was a nightmare. The car seemed solid at the beginning of the turn, but transformed into something radically different at the apex, forcing him to improvise reactions in a fraction of a second, without warning. That variability turned each fast lap into a roulette wheel. And although he sometimes managed to extract performance, most of the time the car betrayed him. In wet conditions or with tires in the wrong window, the instability was even more dramatic. This explains his inconsistent classifications, the losses of rhythm without apparent explanation, the errors that were not his. Because the car in essence was lying. And Lewis knew it even if he couldn't prove it. The discovery in Abu Dhabi not only validated all those sensations, it transformed them into irrefutable empirical evidence. For the first time, Hamilton was able to demonstrate that he was not imagining anything, that it was not a question of lack of adaptation, nor of incompatible driving style, but a real structural limitation. His internal struggle suddenly became one of the most heroic acts of his career. Driving a broken car throughout an entire championship without raising your voice publicly, without fracturing the team, without fueling internal chaos, requires a mettle and maturity that very few possess. The moment in which Frédéric Vasseur was informed of the structural failure discovered in the SF-25 was not simply another technical fact in his journey as team leader. It was an internal shock, a brutal shift in the understanding of an entire season. The first reactions within the team were not one of triumph for having discovered something hidden, but rather one of absolute bewilderment. Not only had the error been there all along in front of them, but it had been systematically ignored by all levels of the technical team. Vasseur, known for his pragmatic and direct nature, was left speechless. According to sources close to Maranello, the French director expressed his surprise with a mixture of frustration, relief and self-criticism. The seriousness of the finding lay not only in the nature of the defect, but in what it meant in terms of technical management. Because what Vasseur and his team were facing was not just a design flaw, but a complete collapse of the correlation system between simulations, wind tunnel, track telemetry and pilot sensations. In Formula One, data correlation is at the heart of any technical operation. If what you see on the computer does not translate to the track, you are operating blind. And that's exactly what happened with Ferrari in 2025. But beyond the technical problem, what really shook Vasseur was the recognition that they had failed as a structure by systematically ignoring Hamilton's complaints. For months, Lewis had been considered the variable factor, the non-adapting element, the veteran who perhaps no longer had the same sensitivity or reflexes. And now, with the data on the table, it was clear that the car had a behavior that only a driver of his level and experience could detect. The phrase that began to be heard inside Maranello was lapidary: "We had one of the best drivers in history shouting something at us that we decided not to listen to." The discovery in Abu Dhabi was not just a symbolic closure for the 2025 season. It was in many ways the zero point of a new stage for Ferrari. Discovering the structural failure of the SF-25 a few weeks before the end of the year has had an immediate impact on the planning of the 2026 car, and not only in technical terms. It has also triggered a change of mentality within Maranello, a transformation that begins to put Lewis Hamilton at the center of the project, not only as a driver but as a structuring figure of the team. From a technical point of view, the SF-26, which until then was in the preliminary design phase, has undergone an emergency review. The plans that had been validated by simulations and a wind tunnel were stopped to be re-evaluated under a new magnifying glass, that of physical reality not observable with traditional tools. Ferrari has decided to reconfigure the structural rigidity protocols of the chassis and completely modify the architecture of the connection between the front axle and the monocoque. This is not a simple update. It is an urgent redesign. And at the center of this entire process, Hamilton's input has gone from being one more to being the axis of the validation criterion. The team of engineers leading the evolution of the SF-26 no longer only consults telemetry. Joint work sessions between designers, aerodynamicists and drivers are now integrated, something that historically at Ferrari had been more ceremonial than effective. Lewis actively participates in these meetings. His feedback is not limited to what he feels on the track. It includes hypotheses, comparisons with previous experiences at Mercedes, and concrete proposals on how to prevent the car from re-entering what he himself has described as gray zones of structural behavior. What happened in Abu Dhabi was not simply a technical discovery. It was a profound revelation that changed the way we understand the relationship between rider, machine and team. The discovery of the phantom defect in the SF-25 has completely rewritten the narrative of Ferrari's 2025 season and furthermore has forced the entire Maranello structure to confront its own vulnerability. For months, they thought they had a competitive car with a driver who didn't fit. But it was the other way around. They had a broken car that only one of the best drivers in history could identify as such. Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.